Oh, well, didn't mean to start that again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Talented People live session. For those of you who don't know me, I am Kimberly Godbolt, and this is what I look and move like, because quite a lot of the time you guys see me in photos or on the Imposter Club podcast where you're just listening to my voice. So hi, nice to meet you, and thanks for joining us this lunchtime. Talented People is a specialist search company in TV and video for freelance and permanent hires. So a lot of you might know us from finding work through us or be working with us to help fill your roles. And we have run lots of these live sessions in the past. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be bringing you another one today as we're trying to kick off a bit more content in this way. You can find the old ones on our website on the sessions page. So today's session is about the making of Channel 4's The Jury murder trial. Such a great premise. For those of you who haven't seen it, I mean, there's going to be some spoilers probably in this, but you're going to need to run and watch it. It was stripped across this whole week. It's a rerun. Well, maybe I should get the makers to explain it, but it's an absolutely brilliant premise where we kind of throw the British jury system into the spotlight and watch what two juries watching the same real trial rerun by actors decide in the end. I'm going to introduce you to the makers now. We're really lucky to have them because it's been such a mad week for them. So here is Ed. Kellie. Ed is the MD of Screendog and exec. Hi, Ed. How you doing?
Hello.
And here is Fiona. Fiona is she was the production and welfare exec across the series. Hi, Fiona.
Everyone.
This is Max. Max is that he was the series exec. Lovely to see you, Max. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
And here is Bruce Goodison. It was the drama exec. And it's lovely to have you here, Bruce. Nice to meet you.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
It's like going for gold.
It is going for gold. Do you love my screens as well? I'm about to whack up some kind of quiz thing on a certain side of the page. Yeah. So we are just going to chat about the challenges of making it, the brilliant bits of making it, the most difficult bits, and also give you an insight into how such an unusual kind of complex layered format came about and has done so well stripped across this week. So Ed, how are you? How has your week been, and how do you feel now it's all gone out?
I mean, it's been a dream of a week, to be honest with you. You know, every program you make in telly is really hard work, right? And sometimes I don't even like watching them go, like sinking feeling that, oh, it's over. What was all that about? And then you move on. But this has been one of those rare ones that, you know, we've just had endless streams of people getting in touch saying how much they love it. We've had lots of requests from media wanting to know more, and Fiona's had her moment in the spotlight as well. I've been asked to appear on all sorts of radio things. So and the ratings have been good, and the critical acclaim's been good, and so yeah, I mean it's been a bit of an unreal week, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, bold premise, risky premise. I mean, I'm sure there's been loads of times where you've thought, how can we do this properly without getting completely kind of criticized for various different reasons? So tell us about how long ago did this idea actually come into fruition, and from sort of idea to screen, how long has that been?
So it was the summer of 2020. Take yourselves back to the Black Lives Matter riots, and we were thinking about personal biases, unconscious biases, how strong and real are they in all of us, and where do they have the most impact? Well, in a jury room, of course, and then we were also developing lots of crime at the same time, and we thought, my God, wouldn't it be amazing to reconstruct a jury inside some notorious cases? And it kind of evolved from there. And then when we were, first thing I did was speak to a lawyer to see if there was a way we could actually even do this. And once we were satisfied there was, then we started pitching it out. And quite quickly, Channel 4 were interested. And then out of the two jury thing came about because the channel were less interested in a sort of pure true crimey thing. They were more interested in a sort of systemic test. And so 2 juries. I mean, Christ, at one point we were talking about doing it with 5 juries, which filled me with complete horror. Actually, 7. Anyway, clearly that would have been an absolute car crash. But anyway, the multiple jurors thing came out of conversations with them, because it really quite quickly we wanted to be about the system, not just about this individual case. So yeah, hopefully we pulled it off.
And how early on did you realize you wanted to do it with a real trial, a real case?
Straight away at the beginning. I mean, that was because there was no point in doing it in a made-up case. It didn't. I mean, there have been previous programs with made-up cases, quite a few actually, and I really, really like the tone of Murder in the Family that Channel 4 did, like in 2017, I think it was. But the difficulty was that there was no objective truth. There wasn't a reality. There wasn't, was it murder or not? It's difficult when it's just in the head of a writer. And secondly, I think when you get into a real case, you realize there's just so many layers of complexity and all sorts of things that happen that you wouldn't dare write, because you'd go, oh, is that too odd? And there's just something about reality that means that for sort of factual and documentary heads like myself, I just adore the sheer sort of madness of real life that you can really reproduce very easily.
The madness of real life. Actually, that segues me into asking you, Bruce, how you felt when you were approached about this, because Screendog being unscripted, factual, you being drama, this being, I mean, something totally new. How did you feel when you first got that call?
Well, it was a few years ago, and and I've grown grey ever since. But no, it was Ed had this fantastic idea of a real case in front of a real jury, and obviously when you run a real case, there are real issues to real cases. Obviously, there are people that have potentially been murdered and families of those that have been murdered. So the big challenge for Ed in the first place was, how do you find a case where you can play it for real? And then I think because I think Ed approached me and Channel 4 approached me largely because of my experience both in drama and in documentary. So I kind of understood the needs of both sides of the coin, if you like. But I think the biggest challenge, I think Ed's touched on it, which is that you want to play something as if it's live to 2 juries, and in order to do that, you need a very special kind of cast that are going to be able to be able to kind of perform live as such, but also a special kind of cast where you don't really recognize them because you don't have any associations with them, with EastEnders or whatever, whatever program it might be. So to find actors of the caliber that were found was really quite tricky, because you want to make sure that they know what they're doing and they're really good and they're able to play all of the variety of different emotional beats that this particular case has, because it's not a popular thing to have murdered somebody, obviously, or not murdered somebody, and or be acquitted of that murder, and then ask an actor to be able to go through that process where you're asking them to be as clear to the facts as possible, clear to the testimony as possible, but you're also you've got a fine line between how much empathy and sympathy you're going to give to that character, because obviously that does impact on a jury's reading. Do I trust this person in front of me? So I think that the challenges were massive because, like I said, you don't want to have any kind of identification with other actors. They've got to remember an enormous amount of dialogue, and in this case, we had earpieces and playback, and they've got to perform live like they are properly in a courtroom to 2 juries. So I think that has massive technical challenges.
Just speaking to that, Just speaking to that, do you remember, Bruce? Do you remember Channel 4 were incredibly nervous about whether it would just be watchable, just because they were worried at the quality of the acting sustained over 2 weeks. We're talking 700 pages, and just looking back, I can remember, you were going, it'll be fine, we'll use earpieces, and Channel 4 would go, well, has anyone ever done it quite like that? And you're like, no, they haven't, but it'll be all right. And
also, I think it's also worth remembering, Ed, as well, that in the first place, we're all aware of verbatim theatre, and Vicky Thompson, who did a fantastic job of casting this. You've got to make sure you work with actors that are used to performing on a stage, because if you like, a courtroom is a stage. It's a performance, it's a theatrical performance, both for the barristers, but also for the defendants and for the witnesses. So you've sort of got it. And I suppose I tried to convince Ed, I said, well, they're used to it. They're used to performing 6-hour plays sometimes, some of them. So I hadn't got the kind of anxieties I think the channel had. But I think what the anxiety might have been was, can we get the right quality of actors that aren't recognizable? And can they feel realistic to a point of not overplaying? Because like I've said, there's a careful balancing act between, you've got a jury, and we didn't want to, or Ed or anybody, Channel 4 didn't want to sway the jury one way or the other. It needed to feel as untarnished by persuasive performance, which is what drama can do, as possible.
Yeah. I have to say, there was debate amongst my friends, family, what I saw online about, that kind of trying to get your head around the idea that the juries are bought into the actors. They aren't the real people. So how did they weren't watching the real person, a video of the real person. They were watching an actor interpreting those words. And even that is sort of mind-blowing in that, is that right? Is that okay?
There was an interesting technique, and I don't mind talking about this because it was fascinating for me to watch, that we would play the entire days of the court case, and we had to decide, do we do it cover to cover every word, or is there going to be a slightly abridged version? And if there is an abridged version, then how does that impact on the experience of the jury? Because you want them to be equally bored and tired, because that also impacts on what their decisions are going to be. But you also want it to be exciting for a TV audience. So there's always that kind of balancing act. But I think that what we did was what Ed and Max did was make sure that there was still enough boredom, if you like, to make it as realistic to a jury as possible, but exciting enough for an audience. So we would play it, or they would play it for real, and then there'd be this other aspect which were called pickups. And anybody who's out there who does drama or anything like that understands that there are points of drama that you might want to redo with a close-up, because obviously during the actual trial itself running live, the cameras were on the outside of the courtroom looking in, quite long lens. So it wasn't interfering with performance. It wasn't interfering or distracting for the jury. Again, another aspect of technically trying to achieve it. And also there was the sound issues. Were the two juries ever going to hear each other? Were they going to know that each other existed? So there were many conversations, both on a design front, but also on a sound front, because you don't want them to know about each other. So finding a physical space that could divide those two juries was again another big production headache. And we had a lot of discussions about perspex, which I don't want to relive.
Because at the end, actually, didn't so the juries didn't know they existed for the first 3 episodes, and then only at the end of the final one did you reveal them to each other, which I thought was a great moment in episode 4. But then you also had that divide between the two.
Spoiler alert.
Everyone knows there were 2 juries, surely. But you managed to, that was a logistical or a practical thing, wasn't it, where you made that divide, you opened it up so they could then see each other, right?
Go on, Max. Yeah.
Go on,
well,
Max.
I mean,
So
so,
let's
yeah,
bring you in.
I-
So Max being unscripted part of this now. So tell Bruce
Yeah.
referenced.
No, I
working
mean, I
very,
probably
very
started
closely.
talking slightly in a slightly
Go on.
sad tone about. I mean, the design was a fascinating challenge in terms of the 2 juries, but I mean, not least in fact, as Bruce referenced, because we had to. I don't know if it's actually even that noticeable, but each box, the jury boxes, are fronted with perspex, which was a sound issue to try and make sure that the other jury didn't hear, but that created its own set of huge kind of concerns about reflections and losing the kind of intimacy of proper close-ups of the jurors and seeing their reactions because we were shooting through glass. So that was a huge headache in itself. But the design of the boxes, we specifically designed it for that, to be able to remove the partition in between. So when they came in the courtroom together and they were able to see each other, because we sort of realised that this would be a big moment where each jury was confronted by each other. And if we weren't able to move the design in any way, they would be aware of the fact that there was a jury next door, but they wouldn't actually be able to see each other. So we worked very closely with Eric Rell, the production designer. Mm-hmm. So he created those boxes and the frontages of those boxes, and indeed the divide we could take down. And even though we filmed in a Chelmsford Magistrates Court and we filmed in a real courtroom, that whole courtroom has basically been entirely repurposed for our uses.
Oh wow!
So where the judge sits, where the barristers sit, where is all completely been moved around in order for us to enable us to have that huge big space where you could have the 2 juries next to each other, which is obviously the only way you can have 2 juries where they can't see each other because they have to be sat next to each other. So that whole courtroom, although it's
worth talking about. Sorry, it's worth talking about the how to identify jury to jury, because obviously there was the red and blue, right? That was another decision.
Yeah, totally. So there was a huge discussions around how would we know who you were with, when you're cutting between one jury to the next. And so in fact there were big editorial discussions initially as to whether we should have a male jury versus a female jury, or a majority male, or find different kind of ways of basically dividing the juries demographically to allow where you were, to understand where you were. But we sort of decided that would mean that the experiment would get very focused on that one issue. So it would be all about how women perceive the trial versus how men perceive the trial, as opposed to what I think we ended up with, which is actually a more complex, nuanced insight into what influences jurors. So so in the end, what we did is work the idea of blue and red, which is obviously again all comes from the production design. So the spaces where they deliberate, the spaces where you see them having breaks, those jury boxes are all built. So they're built within the courthouse, and then the idea was to use the walls, so almost kind of subliminally, you're just sort of you realize you're with the blue jury because there's blue in the background, and equally with the red.
Yeah.
So
although I imagine you didn't want to put a massive team blue, because that would
imply. We did consider giving them tabards.
Oh, really?
How do we dress them in a way that it feels a bit like Squid Game? Do you know what I mean? You have to have those conversations.
There was a little tag conversation as well. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is all part of the prep. There are so many things to consider with so many moving parts.
I'm sure.
And it all came down. I think Ed and I had lots and lots of very early discussions about making it as authentic as it possibly could be for the jury. How do you keep it as authentic as possible? And that is kind of the touchstone of how to do these kinds of things, to just make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to disturb the experience and the authenticity and the truth and the honesty for that jury, because you want them to have the same experience, or as near as damn it experience as the original jury, right from the selection of the jury to the selection of the actors, etc.
Yeah, and actually that's why Max has worked on SAS and brought some SAS colleagues in as well, and that whole juror experience, so that when they entered the courtroom, the court building, there weren't loads of cameras around, there weren't loads of crew milling around. They were led by an usher. The whole thing was designed to be completely immersive, but at the same time had to be ridiculously stage managed, because of course they must never, ever, ever meet or even suspect each other exists. There was a lot of planning that went into all of that.
I'm sure. And actually something I think, again, there's been a lot of discussion about with everybody. And Fiona, I'm sure you were kind of very much across this in your welfare role, was the cast. as in the jury, who you cast and how you cast them, because there kept being things pop up that they were relating to their own lives. And I was sitting there going, has this been cast specifically to find people who might be able to empathize? That doesn't feel right. I don't know. Maybe these things come out organically, and then those people actually going through that experience in a very real way, like Bruce has said, must need a lot of care taken in terms of how they were looked after afterwards. So I suppose that's a question of two parts. Who's best to talk to me about how it was actually, how the jurors were found?
I can probably talk a bit about the casting. I think Fiona can definitely talk about the welfare side.
Yeah.
So the casting, we were, the motivating force was in fact to get a jury that felt real, and not a television cast, and not. I suppose the biggest thing for us is if an actual jury is of course randomly selected. You're written to via the electoral register and told you have to come, and we didn't have the power to compel people to do that. So we had to reach out to people, and within that, there's immediately a bias, isn't there? Because suddenly you get people who want to be on TV or are interested in juries, and that's why they want to do it. So actually, a lot of the hard work went into, and Ed was very keen on this, and I think was right in this, was to find people who weren't that interested, who weren't particularly motivated by the subjects at the base of the case, or indeed the jury system. Because otherwise, to have 24 people who are kind of fascinated by this stuff would be totally wrong, and to give you something totally inaccurate, and also something that felt very like TV. So our main focus was to find a cast that reflected the demographics and the ages that you would have in a real jury, and particularly in that area in Essex. In terms of the backstory, there was a huge amount of crossover. There was a lot of people that had suffered domestic violence and things like that. The slightly shocking thing for me was that is that we weren't looking for that, and that these stories would come up, and it was maybe it was not particularly indicative of how the world is, but I suspect maybe it actually was, and the sort of learning thing is, in fact, when you start to speak to people, because obviously as we were going through the casting process, we were not revealing the case, but you're beginning to talk to people about trying to get a sense of how they might feel about certain subject matters, and just a huge number had stories that involved domestic violence or abuse in some kind of way, to a kind of terrifying degree. And that's something certainly we didn't go looking for, what we need is a woman that has suffered domestic violence, or a man that will sympathise with John in some way or another. And some of those stories came out during shooting as well.
Yeah.
It does speak to that triggering experience of any kind of horrible murder, attack, whatever it might be. It's sort of, and I'm guessing this is Fiona has chapter and verse on this, and it's clearly something that it can become a runaway train if you've not got someone like Fiona to look after that.
Yeah. So Fiona, big job, big series. Right. How did you manage to take care of the cast in this way? It was so huge. Nothing like this had been done before. What was your experience like?
So there's different elements really. So one of the first things is that I worked really closely with Dr. Howie Fine, who's our production psychologist. We spoke to each other in the early stages from development, and actually came up with a really meticulous sort of welfare plan. In the first instance, when we were casting people, Howie would have assessments with those people just to monitor and see if we thought that they were actually fit to go on the program, or actually, in a position within themselves, stable enough, or not too vulnerable to be included in the show. So that was a really thorough process that we went through. We talked to Channel 4 about that as well, and Ed and Max were very heavily involved throughout all that period, along with our casting team. And then from that, we essentially, once we gathered our cast, I then took all of the reports from Howie and all the assessments, and methodically went through those, and actually came up with an individual care plan for each person. So Howie, for example, would say, we might have one person that could be easily triggered into PTSD when hearing this case. So I would specifically look out for any sort of events or circumstances in which we've got a person listening to potential graphic detail, and would be on standby literally outside the jury box to be there to support that person, to check in with them to see if they may want further sessions with Howie, and actually for Howie to offer real in-depth psychological support to them. So it was kind of multi-layered, really, in that we had a plan right from the start. I did a full sort of welfare, mental health, well-being policy, duty of care policies, protocols, work with the channel. All of those were sort of approved and signed off. But I think the key thing that we managed to achieve on this, because it's a bit of a luxury to have a welfare exec on a program start to finish full time. It doesn't really happen. But because of the fact that I'm production and welfare, I'm trained in welfare and mental health as well, we were in quite a nice position, actually, that I was there all the time. So I think the approach was brilliant in that I was able to move from production into welfare at the drop of a hat if there were issues that were coming up. And also I was able to, on a week-to-week or day-to-day basis, actually, just monitor any issues that were coming up, speak directly with Howie, and of course, all the 3 execs, just to check in if there were issues. And then on location itself, we had a really thorough monitoring system. So first and foremost, we had a big major briefing before we started filming about, what were coming up for people, the triggers, the content itself, the things to look out for, and really just chatting to the team as a whole as to, this is a really serious program that we're doing. The content's really serious. It's really graphic, it's very detailed. So not only trying to look after the contributors, but also the crew themselves. Yeah. So almost like it was a bit of a kind of, I say a bit of a pep talk, but it was actually like regular chats with the crew on a daily basis to remind people, you're filming with somebody tonight. They do have a background that may be triggered by certain things that you say. So let's talk about not triggering those people, or let's talk about how you approach that person before filming and the boundaries that we're going to work within, rather than just turning up and push to get the content. So it was all really carefully considered, and the jurors themselves actually were really appreciative of that, very thankful. We had a daily check-in system as well when we were filming of the casting team, just checking in with them every night once they've gone home. How are they feeling? Is there anything that they want to talk through? Is anything concerned about? And actually, it was a really nice system. We did get some people that didn't feel comfortable with certain things, or certain people became upset during filming, and we were there immediately to support them. And then we had a quite clever triage system in that we had quite a few people on the ground looking out for any issues. And then that would go up to me as a sort of, okay, we've got a potential issue here. I would then make a call after speaking to the execs and SPs as to, okay, do we need to escalate this to Howie immediately? Do we need to escalate it to the channel? Or is it okay? So I think the training that I've had, I was able to apply to that really well. And I think, but the most important thing to say, I think, in terms of budgets and how people and companies budget for this going forward, is that we were in a luxurious position because I have the skills and I was there most of the time. So, I'd be interested to hear personally how a welfare plan is implemented on other big shows on perhaps limited budgets.
Yeah, no, that's a really valid point. I mean, you would like to think that on anything like this, you'd have a full-time dedicated welfare person.
Yeah. And you possibly do in some cases, but I'm sort of more on a broader.
No, I hear you. Yeah. And it made me think as you were talking there, I wonder how real jurors get supported. I mean, clearly this was for TV. It was a premise for TV. Therefore, it's our responsibility to look after them, right? But jurors in real life, I wonder if they have a welfare person. Do you know?
We know. They don't get any. And actually, it's a real issue. Jurors find a lot of these cases incredibly traumatic. And the sad thing is, because they're not allowed to talk about the case, actually, it's really hard for them to get any help. And so no one really knows. Like everything with the jury system, no one has any real idea. But certainly there's been quite a lot of anecdotal stuff with jurors being seriously disturbed by what they've witnessed.
Right.
It's actually pretty.
I just wanted to say actually on a welfare thing, actually, I sort of might be interested to talk about is that so obviously we worked very closely with the victim's family, so they were part of the process for us, and that from a welfare perspective was a massive priority, which is obviously, is very different from how your conventional, so they don't appear on screen, obviously, because the nature of the kind of anonymized nature of the series. But actually, a huge element of Fiona's welfare work was making sure that the family were briefed all the way through. But I'll throw that to you, Fiona. But I just thought it's been an interesting element for me to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to do and to be a part of that, actually, because in the beginning, before we all knew what we were doing in this project and how we were going to do it, and there was loads of different layers and multifaceted, in the beginning, we perhaps were thinking the family may have been more involved, but as we went on, they weren't. Then the case was anonymized, and so throughout the process, we have been liaising with the family, informing them of how things were progressing, how things are changing as we've gone along, and just really being really open and sort of frank with them at various different points throughout the production. As this is a new production, things are changing, it's changing for us as well, but we're still here, we really want to support you, be involved as much as you want to be, and we'll talk to you on a regular basis. And so even though they weren't directly involved in the filming, they were always there as a really big part in the background that we had to, treat them with respect, really just think about how we're telling the story, think about how it's going to impact them, their immediate families, because of course, we're talking about the victims' children that we were in touch with, the victim's brother. So, it's quite a tough gig for them, in that all of this is potentially coming up and they're potentially being re-traumatized by it. So yeah, that was a really interesting part of it, actually. And Ed and Will and Max played a really key part of that. Will's our senior development producer as well. They played a really key part in that, actually. And I think collectively, we did a good job actually looking after them, and they've been really pleased so far. And of course, Howie, the production psychologist, has got a direct link to those family members as well, and we're talking to them currently actually about how we can continue to support beyond TX, which is really important to us for them and the jurors.
I think one of the things, there's a lot of dilemmas around the ethics of true crime, and particularly retrying, in effect, I suppose, a trial. It's hugely contentious, not just on the victim's family, but of course on the defendant's family as well. And in a way, actually knowing, we did a viewing, so they saw the programs, and we were able to, obviously, we have total editorial control, but we were able to address things that needed addressing. And I guess it's like a real watchword, and it's a real focus when you're making the program, knowing that one day the victim's family are going to see this, and potentially the defendant's family. Well, the defendant's family will see it as well at some point, and you have to really, really think carefully whether you can look them in the face the following day and be proud of what you've done. And I think at a very, very basic level, it's quite a reality check, that as a producer, and it makes you, I think it makes you make something which it's not an easy pressure, but I genuinely think the programs are better for it if you sort of carry that weight with you a little bit.
Yeah, that is certainly a burden, isn't it? Or a self-checker, isn't it, as well, exactly. Of operating with integrity. Yeah. Interesting question actually come here, and I want to talk to you about the edit in a minute, but thanks for your question, Matt. Lovely to have you as part of the session. He says, congrats on a fascinating and impressive production. Have any of the panel done jury service? He's only watched the first step, but found it incredibly representative of his experience on a jury. Anyone done jury service?
No, I've not done jury service.
No,
but
I've always wanted to, which is why we've made the show. No.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Matt. So, because there's me going, oh, have they just, with my cynical telly brain on, have they cast people because of, they want certain backgrounds and representations? And now that I know you did not, this is interesting that you have found that as a cut of society, because that's exactly the point, right? You wanted to find people who would legitimately have been part of that process.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
we did sort of during the research, just naturally, it's very hard to seek out jurors or people who've done jury service. In fact, it's sort of arguably illegal. But through the research, it's amazing. People, you know, there was someone who worked on the design team who'd done jury service, for example. There was just random people and we got real insights into how it worked actually, and it was really invaluable. So we did speak to lots of people who'd done it, and I've got friends who've done it, but yeah, none of us have.
We had just to chip in there. We had a very interesting email this morning from a viewer saying that actually we got it totally spot on. They felt really coerced actually in the jury that they were on, and there was quite a bit of internal bullying. He said, yeah, you got it bang on. And actually, so it's even more interesting that there's people coming forward to say, actually, it really is scary. This is what happened in my case as well.
Wow. I'd love to talk about the edit. I mean, I'm just sitting there thinking as an ex-PD, the challenges that you're facing, trying to satisfy the storytelling, creativity, but with accuracy and fairness to what really happened and those sort of choices you've made. I mean, how do you balance those two sides? I mean, Max, you were across the edit, weren't you? All the 4 eps?
So no, in fact, I was cutting at one. So I cut at one, and then in fact, Tom Garland, who's not on this, but was executing the edit. So I just took episode 1, and then Ed was obviously also across the edits.
Like I imagine, Bruce, you were very much involved as well in that, because you're trying.
I wasn't. I mean, they quite wisely kept me away, because obviously I'd be
That's not true, Bruce.
I'd be fighting for the drama. I think just on a. Obviously, I experienced the reading of the case and the selection of the actors and the decision making going into how it was cast and played, etc. But in terms of the interplay between fact and fiction, I think that is a very tricky balancing act, because you want to honour the case itself and the highs and lows of that case, and to be able to an audience at home access a case in a way that feels satisfactory to them, which is a lot of conversations that we had early doors. How do you satisfy an audience at home, regardless of the fact that you're actually running a live case for a jury? You're also trying to make a TV program.
Yeah.
So there was obviously a lot to go into an edit with, and lots of decision making to create that balance between what's happening behind the scenes and what's happening on the drama floor, if you like. And they're quite different things. We had a lot of discussions around how to manage that difference.
Yeah.
But no, but Max and Ed were all over the edit. I wasn't.
Yeah. So Ed, Bruce wasn't allowed in. Who was?
So yeah, we got Tom Garland, who had done some stuff with Alf before. He oversaw. I mean, we were running 4 edits in a staggered way. In practice, to be honest, the way it shook down was that eps 1 to 3 kind of were of a similar format, which, by the way, however much you think you know the format before you go in, of course, in the edit, you sort of have to rediscover it all. But ep 4 was kind of a very different beast. So we actually ended up sort of getting to a rough cut stage, parking it, and then coming back to it, and yeah, I mean, we finished that about 3 days before it went out, to be perfectly honest. Well, maybe a little bit more, but it was pretty tight. And
Alf Laurie was credited as writer. So he came in.
So actually, I mean, Max will be able to talk about the edit probably in more painful detail than me as well, because it was a bit like trying to do a Rubik's Cube, because just thinking about the actual drama part of it. So what you've got is a 700-page case which has been performed theatre-wise. And then obviously you've got to have a very good idea before you go into the edit what the key moments are in your drama. So each episode roughly breaks down into 5 drama beats, and every drama beat needs to reveal something interesting, new, give some sort of twist on the unfolding crime. And because of the sort of very arcane way in which trials are presented, that means you basically can't do it in a chronological way. because it just is kind of boring, to be honest. For example, there was a day and a quarter of just reading police interviews. Now, there were some brilliant nuggets in them, but you couldn't obviously use them in one chunk, so you needed to spread them around. So basically what we did was, anyone who's, I think it's probably, and I mean this genuinely in the nicest way, but anyone who's worked with Alf will know that he is he's kind of, in the nicest way, a frustrated program maker at heart. He loves to get stuck in, right? And so he'd actually already done a couple of these trial kind of rerun things. We've been talking to him for so long that he did the Wagatha Christie transcript show with Shortboard, and I think he's done something else as well. But anyway, he's sort of familiar with crunching trials down. So he basically said, look, I really, 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 really want to do it. So to cut a long story short, he did it terrifyingly late. The actors were sort of waiting for scripts and everything. But he basically, and that's why he got the writer credit, because in all real terms, he broke the back of that. I mean, we did sort of various drafts and things, but there was one sort of remarkable weekend where he must have just like existed in a hole somewhere. And
what we're going to see next from Alf Laurie then.
Well, exactly.
Watch this space. Alf, send me your CV.
Yeah, exactly. But that script was, I mean, it was the pieces were from all over the 8 days of trial, and so that then meant that, of course, your reactions that the jurors are making to that stuff is also spread throughout the 8 days. So it's a bit like, and of course, because it's spread throughout the 8 days, they might know stuff that they're not really supposed to know, but they do know because they've sat through the theatre. And of course, there's a sort of unfolding jury dynamic story that has to be told relatively chronologically. So it really is like a Rubik's Cube editing this, and it really took us, to be fair, it took us a while to get into the rhythm of it. And Max probably bore the brunt in Ep 1.
Max, how did you survive? And I mean, episode 1 of anything is always, a total mind. But this,
no, I mean, I very much went in with my eyes open in terms of like a new format involving drama and documentary and 24 contributors. And in fact, as Ed said, essentially we created a drama, or Alf had written the drama, which was non-chronological. So you were seeing moments of drama in the courtroom, which might come from day 4 in the trial. And so the natural rhythm of how you would cut the factual wasn't there. So, you weren't able to go, okay, well, episode 1, I'm cutting day 1 and 2. Episode 2, they're cutting day 2 and 3, or day 3 and 4, because actually you were having to seek reactions from different days to kind of piece it together, which on a practical level had its challenges. And then really you're telling the story of the trial, but you're also telling the story of the 2 juries, and making that marry was the real challenge. And I think that's what really took the time. It's the idea that you're not only seeing how this story unfolds of a man that is accused of murdering his wife, but also how these 2 juries come to ultimately 2 contrasting opinions, and how those dynamics work, and understanding the storytelling for that, at what point you start to see how juries diverge at versus how you just see them initially viscerally react to facts, was a lot of the balance. So I think episode 1, we spent a lot of time early in a very sort of complex kind of personality driven edit, where you're really kind of getting into the jurors' personalities and how they're interacting with each other and how the dynamics of the juries are playing out. And actually a lot of that we stripped out of Ep 1 because it was too early. And in fact, as an audience member, you're just trying to get your head around what the hell's going on here. There's a man killed his wife. Like, what's happening here? And so
also as a viewer, I think
kind of rhythm across the series is
you almost want to kind of go be part of it, don't you? You're sitting there thinking, what would I have thought if I had just heard these things? I mean, I imagine you had all sorts of discussions and complications about which parts of the edit to use as well, in terms of biasing people too late down the line, or the fact that the jury had been in the court all day we haven't as a viewer. You've only got 47 minutes to show us that stuff. So how you've almost got that then the audience at home element of how to make this real. I mean, it's hurting my head just thinking about it.
Totally. And there's a very, you know, as Ed said, you know, using a real case is a kind of phenomenal thing. But then equally, you know, it's very easy. And if you're using a fictional case, you can twist it slightly, and so you could really make him appear incredibly innocent and wonderful, and her horrendous and awful. And you know, there are elements of that. That's how a little bit how the lawyers tell the story. But also, we're always conscious that we're dealing with real people, and so to create kind of like really contrived cliffhangers, although
it doesn't
tempting,
feel right.
it's very tempting as a filmmaker. Was not really on the cards for us because we knew that we had to sit down with the families and explain ourselves.
I think what we learned though in the edit was actually to really, as Max has said, to sort of, especially in the early eps, to sort of really dial down the sort of diverging jury stories, or even to some degree, even the jury dynamic stories. It was really, especially ep 1 and maybe for a lot of ep 2 as well, it's just really about getting to know some individual jurors and the sort of impacts and life experiences and biases and things that kind of inform their quite intransigent views sometimes. And so once we'd started to see how that played out, and we realized that in and of itself was just really, really, really compelling, because you're really getting inside someone's head, and there's something sort of really deeply fascinating about that. Then it kind of got a lot simpler, because we realized that we didn't have to sort of do everything all at once. We could just sort of drip feed, and actually really in ep 3, especially, in Blue Jury in particular, that is actually really a story of, jury dynamics and trusting Ollie or not. And then by ep 4 and deliberation, we're not interested really in the individuals, or even to some degree the details of the evidence. By that point, it is pure jury dynamics. So just talking about ep 4, you've got complex stuff going on there, because it's so easy for it to end up as being 24 people in a room. How the hell do you make an hour of gripping, unfolding telly out of that? And we realized we had to build it around the turns, but we also had to have an unfolding, developing sort of route to verdict argument, so that they were discussing triggers. It was a kind of more visceral reaction and votes to start off with, I suppose. Then it's about triggers. Then it's about reasonable man. Then it's about reasonable doubt. And so you get a sense that actually the conversation's also moving on. So it's not, because it's so easy for this to become incredibly circular and repetitive, and you just have to avoid that at all costs.
Actually, on that note, we've had a really good question about whether you would do another series. Could you? And would that even be feasible, do you think? I mean, not mentally and burnout wise, but could you do another series? And if so, what would you do differently next time?
Well, we are talking to them about another series, and as to whether it's one jury or two, as to whether there is a difference in the juries. I mean, look, this is a very, very early development. We don't, these are just ideas at this point. But we've got, there's an idea that I personally quite like, which will probably get shot down in flames by the channel. But personally, I quite like the idea of having two juries again, but maybe one of the juries has been sort of improved in some way. So maybe there's some element of jury selection that's gone on, whereby defense and prosecution can eliminate two jurors each, or the jury has undergone some sort of training, or just something that makes you think, okay, we've got the so-called improved jury, and then we've got the normal jury. Might be interesting.
Like
that. So I'm giving away our ideas here, which is probably
brilliant.
not
I don't know what you're doing here, Ed. It's like, what are you doing?
Exactly. Okay, I need to stop. But anyway, but we, of course, we're discussing series 2, and in a way, I suppose the other thing about it is that the two jury thing is a big specialist factual sort of experiment. But once you've done that, maybe it's a bit more of a narrative thing, which points to whether we should just be doing single juries, and it's much more just about the experience of being a juror and the crime and etc.
Mhm.
So anyway, it's all up in the air. But we do
I
want
love
to.
that. Love that, Ed. And also, look, you guys have made it now. No, I mean, you know how to do it. Like no one else could pull that off. So don't worry about that. Your secret's safe with us.
Fingers crossed. I bet you there's some copycats.
Fiona, apart from you know, having a much bigger budget next time, which would be lovely, would you want to do anything differently, like from a production management point of view?
Well, yes. No, it's interesting actually, because I was thinking about in your sort of email, you know, on subjects that we might touch on. One of them was, you know, what were the challenges? And this will, you know, put dread into the ears of Max, Bruce, and Ed, because one of the biggest challenges that we did have actually was making the drama work for a factual budget. And as the guys will testify, there was many of a debate of how best we do this, how can we do it for the budget. I think there must have been about 40 different variations of a completely separate budget midway through production as to, you know, how the hell do we meet the drama expectations on the factual budget. And that is something that, you know, knocked the cells out of all of us after the 40th round of budgeting. But, you know, we got there in the end with it. And I think if there were a series 2, then we can go into all of that a bit more knowledgeable. And also the fact that, you know, I hadn't worked in drama before, you know, so having Bruce on board was absolutely fantastic, because, you know, I was always tapping up Bruce for info, for, you know, who do I talk to, this and that. And Bruce is, you know, always giving this brilliant information and drip feeding really vital key bits to us in the production team that I think we would have struggled with without Bruce, 100%. But then, you know, now we've done it, you know, there are certain mistakes that we look back and go, oh, we should have done that a little bit differently. But actually, now you're out the other end and we've done this cracking show. You know, it was really hard in places. But having, you know, sometimes we started off, I'm like, why the hell do we need all these execs? You know, it's insane. And I'm like, there's a reason for that. And actually, everybody played a really key part in making sure we stayed on budget, we kept on the rails, we didn't sort of end up in fisticuffs. We nearly got there over the drama budget, but not quite. But you know, so I think having had all that experience, it would be a way smoother ride next time, because we know how we can achieve it, you know.
Yeah. Bruce, what about you if you were doing it again?
I mean, Fiona said a lot of it there. I mean, there's always been, with fact and fiction, there's always going to be a you know, divided by a common language situation. So really, you know, I was often finding myself in the situation being a kind of interpreter for like what the fact people needed and what the fiction people needed. If we were to do this again, if I was to be invited to do this again, I think my advice probably would be around scripting, to be honest. As Ed touched on, having scripts late for this style of filming where you want a level of naturalism, I would do 2 things, I suppose. One is to insist on those scripts being created much earlier, so that then there's a greater sense of what might be required on the kind of on the factual side as well with the jury, what sort of stories you are going to be, what Ed's called the kind of beats of each part, so that you know where you're going with the drama, you know what you're going to be trying to expose to an audience. So then at least for Max and his team, you then know which are going to be the levers to pull, if you like. So I would be saying, let's get those scripts way earlier, because it means that then you can cost it better, you can cast it more accurately, you can direct it more accurately. Caris Lewis, who is the director on the ground, you know, obviously she didn't know which way it was going to go. So when you are doing the pickups, it's like, well, what bits of this drama are going to be exposed to an audience? And of course, every director wants it to look and sound and be as brilliant as it possibly can. But I think that what we did learn was actually going a complete naturalistic route and blending that with the factual side, so there isn't a massive disruption between moving between fact and fiction, or drama and what Max and his team were doing. Not to have that, I think, you know, I mean, I'm saying this, I haven't had this conversation with Ed, but I'm saying that I felt that the naturalism was the better way to go with that, which obviously naturalism is cheaper. It doesn't need so many lights or so much grip equipment, but you've got to have great actors, right? And you've got to be able to rehearse those great actors, and rehearsal is quite important. So that's a cost thing as well. So like Fiona says, if you're making factual work with drama, it's really hard. They need, you know, they need rehearsal, they need paying, they've got contracts, they've got costumes, they've got makeup, all of that stuff. So I would say get the script earlier, know where you're going, and then it kind of helps with the whole post-production side of things as well. You know what bits you're going to be editing.
And actually, we should say massive kudos to the actors, because they were
100%,
fantastic.
100%.
And
Yeah,
like you say, they'd never done anything like that before either. They've got to do it theatre style, not overplay it, not underplay it, stick to what's accurate.
you have to be clever. I mean, like one of the big things. I mean, we talked about this a lot, Ed, but one of the big things, what we early on decided against the looky-likey, because obviously we were anonymizing the names, which again was another big pre-production decision, because obviously you then have an actor that always wants to do their part particularly well, and they need to research it. But obviously in this case, you can't really research it. A man had killed his wife, and it's a difficult part to research. And I think that the actor, and I'm going to get his name up because he doesn't even name check, which is Sam Alexander, was a really incredibly nuanced performer that understood the vulnerabilities of a person that had killed his wife, and when to you know, when that, because being in that situation, when to be empathetic to that person and that character, because obviously they have lost someone that they maybe did love, although they did kill them. It's like it was so easy to play someone that was a bad guy, you know, and obviously that was a horrendous thing that he did. But are we totally, you know, he would have to have these conversations about is this a total bad guy, or is this someone that's conflicted? And obviously through all the witness testimonies and all the research that Ed and his team had done, it was important that we gave all of that to the actors, including the legal team as well, who need to do a lot of homework. You know, all of that stuff comes with enormous responsibility when you're acting a real case.
I think there's one other, if you like, unsung hero that we should probably kind of mention, which is a lot of it, as Bruce has alluded to, was done with earpieces. And in fact, the people who are doing that prompting almost need to act and get the intonation of those lines absolutely right. And frankly, we were lucky with the people that we got, because we didn't really hire knowing how important that skill was going to be. But, you know, Sam will say that his prompter, I mean, they really were a kind of a team, and actually it saved him, and it to some degree would have saved the production actually.
Yeah,
totally.
That's a good kind of maker's secret that you've
I know. I'm just giving away all the bloody stuff.
There are quite a lot of great maker's secrets here, because you're doing something new, and you are combining lots and lots of things that don't normally sit well together. So
yeah, super creative though, right? Very exciting.
You learn lots from that.
On a really positive sort of end note, apparently we broke a world record for the longest live piece of theatre ever acted.
Well, Will looks
right there.
Yeah. It's apparently they don't do a record in this category. He actually spoke to them.
Oh, did he? I thought
he would have if they had the category. Anyway, sorry.
Was that because you were filming live, like theatre style, for like hours on end?
So there
7 day long.
Exactly.
Wow, days, 7 days. My God. I'm realizing it's nearly 2:00. Have you guys got time for 2 quick questions from people? Please feel free to drop if you need to. Antonia asks, were you ever concerned that the 2 jury teams wouldn't be different enough from each other? I mean,
yes.
I secretly whooped when they got a different answer. Not in, you know, whooping. I don't think is quite appropriate for this. Unlike the jurors who kind of felt that it were, or some of them. But I mean, you must have gone, wow, yay!
Literally the night before filming, we were still debating with the channel whether we were going to openly rig the 2 juries or do it randomly. And I mean, I will never forget, you know, the light was fading outside, and just saying, look, I'm just going to do it randomly, and we'll just see how it turns out. And we saw the cards on the table, and we were like, okay, that looks reasonably different. We think, let's go for it. And but even with that, you just don't know. And it was a high wire act. It really was. But then, you know what? If they had agreed, we'd all perhaps sleep better at night. So, you know, it's good.
Yeah, double-edged sword. And Anouk would love to see another series dealing with bigger justice issues, like problems with expert witnesses. Ooh. I mean, I don't know if you're up for taking that on, but, you know, more in this space, maybe, TBC.
Maybe. I mean, we've got to find things that are kind of popular tabloidy conversations, I suppose, at the same time. So, I mean, you know, for example, I don't know, we are looking at other cases. We might be doing a terrorism case, for example, which is all about the power of the state and falsifying information. And I don't know, but there's various ideas that we're kicking around. So, yes, watch this space, really.
I mean, massive kudos to the whole team. Is there anything else you guys want to tell me or celebrate? I mean, have you got viewing figures from last night?
Last night we were just over 1 million. But overall, I mean, episode 1 is now. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what the Channel 4 streaming are, but it's very, very comfortably north of 2 million with consolidated. Ep 2 is not far off. Ep 3 is. I mean, it's their most, according to the channel, it's their most successful launch in the last couple of years. Although actually I would have thought the piano must have been probably slightly higher than us, but anyway, we'll see. I don't know, but it's certainly up there.
Musical justice.
Both
popular.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but to be kind of up there with that is really impressive.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for divulging and indulging us with your behind the scenes stuff. I mean, there's so much to talk about. We couldn't even barely touch the bones here. Ed, I hope you're going to get some more sleep at night now. Yeah, and you should all go out. We were talking actually about how in the olden days we would go out for a boozy lunch or take the team out somewhere, and you really need to do that if you haven't already.
You
know what? We actually have been doing this.
You hear what Kimberly just said, Ed? I know some great restaurants in London.
Max is in bloody Italy, but yeah.
We can go to Italy, Ed.
I'll happily come over.
Yes,
Come to me.
yeah.
Come to me.
Yeah, Fiona, I'm actually saying
I'm promising we will have a boozy lunch, all right?
What, in Italy? At Max's place?
I hear that Fiona kept some money back for an Italian trip afterwards.
Yeah, I wish. I think it's just for one though, Kimberly. I've already booked my ticket.
Oh, fair play. I mean, you need welfare, being the welfare person, don't you?
Yeah.
Exactly. No, but serious congratulations. We've loved it, absolutely loved it, and I've no doubt it's going to grow as people find it, and hopefully haven't read the spoilers, but. I just think the way the production is turning, these hybrids are really important in terms of creativity, pivoting, you know, keeping both us behind the camera and the viewer gripped and interested in old topics in a way, or things that have been done before. So I really congratulate you, and it was brilliant to work with you, even though it was very early production stages a little while back. But thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to, with these guys' permission, stick this up on our website afterwards so you can find it and watch it if you missed bits while you were making lunch or hopefully working. And yes, if we don't know you, please do send us your CV. We work with lovely production companies like Screendog, small and big, and like to make introductions. So keep an eye on our jobs board, and I will continue conversations with lovely people like this for our future roles. So lovely to see you all. I hope you're all keeping well at home, and thanks ever so much for Screendog. Congrats on the series, and we'll speak again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks very much.
Bye.